Okay, as we continue this series and how Jesus fulfills the biblical feasts, we have some other timing issues because the next feast that comes after unleavened bread is the feast of first fruits. And first fruits takes place actually during the feast of unleavened bread. The 7-day period of unleavened bread, somewhere in that 7 days, there will be a Shabbat, a Sabbath, and then the first day of the week. Somewhere in those 7 days, there will have to be a Shabbat and the first day of the week. And the first day of the week is really important because the first day of the week is the day when Jesus is going to be risen from the dead. He's going to be found as risen from the dead. So, well, let's just go to Matthew. While we're in the book of Matthew, let's go back to chapter 12. I want you to see something here. Verses 39 and 40. Well, let's just read from verse 38. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, that is Jesus, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." But he answered and said to them, "An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it, but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." That's a very clear prophetic statement. You're not going to get any signs except this one. And the sign is of Jonah the prophet. And just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And as a result of that prophetic statement, it is my understanding that the timing between when Jesus dies on the cross until the time that he is raised from the dead is a period of 3 days and 3 nights. That's how I see it. And this is, I believe, how Jesus fulfilled it. And I hesitate to say this because I don't want to offend anybody who celebrates Good Friday as the day that Jesus was crucified. It's good that we observe that Jesus was crucified and that we celebrate that he was raised from the dead. But I'm not convinced that Friday was the day. I believe it needed to be slightly earlier in the week in order to fulfill the specific sign that he stated to the Pharisees would be, and that is the sign of Jonah, the sign of being in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. For that reason, it is my personal belief that it was either a Wednesday or a Thursday. Either of those days can work in terms of the mechanics of 3 days and 3 nights. To me, I don't know how you make that work from Friday afternoon until Sunday morning when he's already raised from the dead. I don't know how you get 3 days and 3 nights out of that. I don't know how you can make that work. But anyway, I leave that to you. Go research for yourselves. Think it through. See what you think. But Jesus definitely gave that prophetic statement to the Pharisees, and I believe he fulfilled it very specifically. And so when Jesus was raised from the dead, he was raised from the dead on the Feast of First Fruits. Okay, now, and as I might have mentioned, the Feast of First Fruits always occurs on the first day of the week within the 7 days of unleavened bread. So you have Passover, then the next day begins unleavened bread, and somewhere in that 7 days is the Feast of First Fruits, and that is the day that Jesus is raised from the dead. So let's think about that for a minute. This first fruits. If we go to Leviticus 23, we'll get just a little bit of detail on it. Leviticus 23 and verses 9 through 11. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When you enter the land which I am going to give to you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. Well, the day after the Sabbath is always the first day of the week. So on the day after the Sabbath, the first fruits is to be waved before the Lord in order for them to be accepted. That was the legal requirement. There's something else in here about waving before the Lord that I just want to point out while we're here. Numbers chapter 8. Numbers 8. It's actually verses 5 through 21. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But I'll read from verse 14. Thus you shall separate the Levites from among the sons of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. Then after that, the Levites may go in to serve the tent of meeting, but you shall cleanse them and present them as a wave offering. For they are wholly given to me from among the sons of Israel. I have taken them for myself instead of every first issue of the womb, the firstborn of all the sons of Israel. I wanted you to catch that in the dedicating of the Levites, of the Levitical priesthood, they would be presented as a wave offering before the Lord. There's a connection between the wave offering of first fruits and the wave offering, if you will, of the first fruits of the priesthood. And so there is a specific fulfillment that has to happen. Go to John chapter 20. Let's have a look there for a minute. Because Jesus, I believe, makes reference to this particular fulfillment in verse 17. Let's just go back let's go back to verse 15. Jesus said to a woman, Why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said to her, Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came, announcing to the disciples, I have seen the Lord, and that he had said these things to her. Stop clinging to me, Jesus says, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. I believe he is making reference to this practice of the wave offering. He needs to be presented before the Father as the first fruits offering. Remember, Jesus being resurrected from the dead is specifically referenced as a first fruits. Jesus is the first fruits of the dead. And now he's saying, don't cling to me. I've got to be presented to the Father. I'm going to be back and spend time with you. Even now I've been resurrected. But I have to be presented to the Father first. And he has to be presented in a certain way. Part of the reason I believe he's saying, don't cling to me. You know, you see it during the Feast of First Fruits. You see the Jewish people carrying, the religious Jews carrying these little sheaves with the first fruits, the different kinds of first fruits, and they carry them in a special case in order to go to synagogue or to the Western Wall or to wherever to the synagogue or the Western Wall to wave their offering before the Lord as a first fruits offering. And in the same way, Jesus is saying, I need to be protected just now. I have to go be presented to the Father as a wave offering, not only as the first fruits from the dead, but also as in a priestly way, being set apart. Anyway, I love that picture. I'll let you dig into that some more, but I find that fascinating. He is being presented before the Father. So the stone is now rolled away from the tomb. Jesus is now resurrected. And I will say this, the stone was not rolled away so that Jesus could come out of the tomb. The stone was rolled away so the witnesses could go in and see that Jesus is no longer there. That's really an important distinction. Let's just look at one more thing before we conclude this session. Exodus 25. I want you to see something here that I find to be amazing. Exodus 25 describes the mercy seat. Remember, the mercy seat was the lid, if you will, of the Ark of the Covenant. The lid that went on the Ark of the Covenant is called the mercy seat. And here in Exodus 25, verses 18 to 22, we get these details. Let's read from verse 17. You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. You shall make 2 cherubim of gold. Make them of hammered work. At the 2 ends of the mercy seat, make 1 cherub at one end and 1 cherub at the other end. You shall make the cherubim of one piece with the mercy seat at its 2 ends. The cherubim shall have their wings spread upward, covering the mercy seat with their wings and facing one another. The faces of the cherubim are to be turned toward the mercy seat. You shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony which I will give you. There I will meet with you. There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are, remember, cherubim are angels, but they're the highest ranking angels, which are upon the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you about all that I will give you in commandment for the sons of Israel. So this is the picture of the mercy seat in the Ark of the Covenant, and God says, there, right on top of that mercy, right above the mercy seat, between the angels, that's between the cherubim, that's where I'm going to meet with you. And so now to take a look over at John chapter 20. And we read this, verses 11 and 12. I love this. But Mary was standing outside the tomb weeping, and so as she wept, she stooped and looked into the tomb, and she saw 2 angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying. I hope you can see the symbolism, the pattern there of this mercy seat with the angel at the top and an angel at the bottom. And this was the place where the body of Jesus had been laid and is now stained with his blood. It's the mercy seat. It is the place where God says, I will meet with you. I will meet with you there. In Exodus 14, let's just read a few verses. Exodus 14, verses 13 through 18. We read about this account of the children of Israel going through the Red Sea. Remember, the Passover itself coincided with the Passover lamb being sacrificed and the children of Israel coming out of slavery and then making their way toward the promised land. And then Pharaoh changes his mind and sends out his armies to chase them and bring them back. And they get to this place. They're in this deep valley with rocks on either side and the Red Sea directly in front of them. And they have nowhere to go. And the armies of Egypt is now approaching them. And the glory of God comes down and stands between the Egyptian army and the people of Israel. And the people of Israel cry out to Moses. Moses calls out to the Lord. You know the story. Let's just read a few verses. Verse 13 of Exodus 14. But Moses said to the people, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. What an amazing message that is. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. and the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen. Let's read on just for a few more verses. Then the angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. And there was the cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided. The sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians. That's key, at the morning watch. The Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve. He made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that its waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The water returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Even Pharaoh's entire army had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. The reason I want to focus on this for a minute is we're talking about the Feast of First Fruits. Remember, we have Passover on the 14th of the month. From the 15th through 7 days is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then in the middle of that, wherever in those 7 days, is the first day of the week. That is the Feast of First Fruits, is that day, the first day of the week. What I'm telling you is that this event that we've just read is happening on the anniversary of the Feast of First Fruits. Just as Jesus was crucified exactly at the time of the sacrifice of the Passover lamb, now the children of Israel have come up out of the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, and now the entire pursuing Egyptian army has been destroyed in that same sea. This is happening on the Feast of First Fruits. This is the picture of being delivered from the Egyptian armies. By the way, this is the picture of baptism. This is why the baptism in water is so important, because it is represented in this picture so marvelously. The children of Israel come out as the first fruits from the dead, as Jesus is raised from the dead, and the pursuing Egyptian army is destroyed. In the waters of baptism, you go through the waters of baptism and you come out of slavery, you come out of bondage, and the forces of evil that want to take you back into slavery, that want to take you back into bondage and into servitude, those forces are destroyed in the waters of baptism. That's the picture that we see here, but it's happening on the Feast of First Fruits. As they come out of the waters of the Red Sea, Jesus comes out of the grave, the first fruits from the dead, resurrected on the Feast of First Fruits. There's a pattern, there's a picture that is being satisfied here that I think is amazing. And when we talk about first fruits, this Feast of First Fruits, it doesn't mean simply first in time, but it also means first in priority, first in importance. Jesus is the first fruits, the first in priority, first in importance. but he lays the pathway. He opens up the way for the rest of us to come to that same place, to be raised up as unto the Lord, resurrected with new resurrection life, and we will receive a resurrected body and resurrection life and live forever in God's glorious kingdom, because Jesus is the first fruits from the dead. And 1 Corinthians chapter 15, let's just read a few verses from there. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 to 23. But now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep. For since by a man came death, by a man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive, but each in his own order. Christ, the first fruits, after that those who are Christ's at his coming. Then comes the end. So Jesus is raised to life for us. He is the fulfillment of first fruits, so that we too will become a fulfillment of first fruits when we are resurrected in newness of life with a resurrection body, just as Jesus says. We will also be resurrected with him in fulfillment of the Feast of First Fruits. Remember, all of this was given in instruction to Moses, I believe, by Jesus himself, knowing that it would be pointing the way to the time when Jesus himself would be the first fruits from the dead. It all points to Jesus. As we discussed this back in the beginning of this session, or in this series, I should say, Jesus fulfills all of it. He doesn't miss a detail, and it is so much for our benefit, so that we may have fellowship with God the Father through Jesus the Son. As we conclude this one, we will move on to the Feast of Pentecost. We'll save this for the next time. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned, if you will, and we'll get into how Jesus fulfills Pentecost.